Hello, everybody, and welcome to the ALS United Mid-Atlantic Goals podcast. I am Tony Heil, Executive Director with ALS United Mid-Atlantic, and if you've listened to our past year's worth of episodes, we have talked with people from a wide variety of perspectives when it comes to ALS. This includes people living with ALS, researchers, caregivers, our care staff and professionals, even people who are working outside of ALS on things like Parkinson's and Huntington's disease, because together we can be united and collaborate towards greater funding for ALS and brain disease research. It takes all of us working together to find better treatments and cures that we will all benefit from, and we all share the same experiences when it comes to things like mental health or brain research and other things that unite us. It's a key part of our name. One person who has really helped us with some of that funding, with some of that advocacy, has also been touched by ALS in his life. He has been a true champion for us in the bipartisan progress in Pennsylvania towards more funding for ALS care and research, including a huge advances in 2025's budget. His name is State Representative Kyle Mullins, and I almost said Brian Cutler because he's our other partner in Pennsylvania. They work together on these issues. We were just talking about his ALS story as well. But Kyle Mullins is here today, the day after St. Patrick's Day, still willing to talk with us about his journey and about his support for the ALS cause. Kyle is from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I'm excited to talk with him today. So, Kyle, thanks for joining.
It's great to be with you, Tony, and to all of you out there. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast and for your support in this club that is ALS. That is those of us who have had lives impacted by ALS.
And you are going to talk about your family's connection to ALS, but you knew about the disease before you knew about it in your family, right? Like, tell people here about when you first got connected to ALS as a disease and cause.
Well, I guess my first education into, what ALS was, I was raised and this won't win me any fans or votes in Pennsylvania, but I was raised a New York Yankees fan by my dad. And to know the New York Yankees and to understand their history is to know Lou Gehrig, who tragically was diagnosed in his 30s and passed away from ALS not long after diagnosis. So, even as a kid, I knew of this disease and that it is fatal and debilitating. And then fast forward to me as an adult and in a support role for a state senator. I used to be a staffer before I was an elected official, and on advocacy days for any number of causes, oftentimes staff has to handle the meetings while the members on the floor voting. And there was a couple from my area, the Millers, and they were there advocating on not just one, but two heartbreaking fronts. The first being distracted driving. Their son, Paul Miller, was killed by a distracted driver who was using their phone. But not long after that tragic loss, Paul's father, Paul Sr., was diagnosed with ALS. So I was so moved and heartbroken over their story and amazed that they had the strength to get up in the morning and then the added strength it takes to come and advocate on both of those fronts in countless offices in the state capitol building. That was one of those meetings. You take a lot of hard meetings and you hear a lot of stories and testimonials about the tough roads that people have walked in this life. And that was one that stayed very clear and present in my memory.
Yeah, and Paul, as he will put it, is still kicking ALS ass. That's his phrase.
Yes, he is.
Uh,
Yes, he is.
he has spoken at many of our events. He will be at our Scranton ALS United Walk on April 18th. So you can go to our website, ALS United Mid Atlantic, to find our information about our walks. And they, with their story, they've inspired so many legislators and other patients and families. Paul and Eileen, they even go to speak at colleges. So the power of a story obviously has a long lasting impact.
It does, and um, that he uses his voice, albeit weakened, uh, perhaps in the strongest of ways,
Yeah.
to raise awareness. But he's he's persevered and continues to advocate despite the challenges that ALS um, continues to visit him with, and he's lived to see finally, at long last, a distracted driving bill become a law in Pennsylvania, and he was here to see our care services line item in the state budget expand in remarkable ways. And then finally, the first ever neurodegenerative disease research funding. So he's using whatever time he's got to make a difference. And he and so many advocates out there are making that difference.
And I think that there are so many people who are cynical about politics, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, Independents. Maybe there's a Whig Party person out there. But you work with colleagues across the aisle, and you know that hearing from people like Paul and Eileen really touches people on a human level. Where we're talking about the research funding bill. You got that bill passed 197 to 4 in the state house. Like, that only happens because the people you work with are human beings that are touched by those stories.
Exactly. I think there's enough in this world, in our politics, in our country, in our human experience to divide us. And I think too often people spend too much time on those things that divide us. And I choose to spend my time and efforts on things that can unite us, on initiatives that can gain the support and get the necessary votes to get to the governor for a signature to make a difference, to make positive change. ALS or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's doesn't check party affiliation before it ravages those patients affected with it and their families. So you really don't have to go too far in searching for someone whose life has been affected by one of these devastating diseases until before you find one, and then someone who agrees quite readily with the need to identify treatments and cures and therapies, and that only happens with the necessary funding.
So, everyone that we talk with in politics, when we talk to a legislator, a staff person, a member of Congress, and DC, senator, they're all human beings that have been touched by some health issue. It's something we can't avoid. And you have your own ALS story. Do you want to share a little bit about how that's impacted you and your life?
Yeah, I mentioned Dad raising me as a Yankees fan, and he was a great dad. And I just I grew up on a quiet street in a small house with just a ton of love. And I know not everybody gets to grow up in that environment. And my father was he was a football player. He had big frame. His mother-in-law, my grandmother, used to call him Paul Bunyan, the famous logging legend. So we were in Ireland for the first time ever all of us, the first time my parents had been to Ireland, we wanted to make sure we got there to celebrate their 60th birthdays. And they were not, none of us were world travelers by any means, but there was some divine pressure that kept pushing the trip. And I'm so glad we did it. It was in the fall of 2019, and we had the most magical, wonderful family trip to Ireland. But it was on that trip where we noticed a slur in my father's voice, and not the type of slur you earn in an Irish pub. Since we're celebrating St. Patrick's Day time now, but it was a different kind of slur, and it worsened through the fall, and he was diagnosed in January of 2020 with ALS at the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I know from what you've told me that for a lot of us, when ALS comes into their lives, like what happened with my grandfather, we don't know anything about it at the time because it's still considered a rare disease. It's not something that most people have had in their personal lives. But you already had some interaction with the Millers. So when that happened, you already had some people you could talk to about understanding this, right?
Yeah, I was able to call Eileen Miller, and this was before before my father was diagnosed, and it kind of bounced the symptoms off of her, and she feared that it was ALS. My father's was called bulbar onset, so it started with his voice, and then swallowing, then and then breathing, and his it was a pretty quick decline. They say the average life expectancy is 2 to 5 years, and he was from diagnosis until the time he passed a little over 2 years. And but that's the thing, when you sit shell shocked in your doctor and your neurologist office, and they give you that news. One of the many heartbreaking and devastating things about these diseases is a clock is set, and you don't know just how long you've got, but it's a certain clock because it is a fatal disease. And I remember wishing and praying that some clinical trial swooped in to save his life. And I know that although it wasn't in time for Dad, I know that's going to happen. I remember sitting there and in the months after thinking that there were these amazing, ingenious strangers in research labs across the state, across the country, across the world, trying to develop cures and ultimately save my father's life and others. So there was hope in that. Even though I lost my dad, I never lost hope that we are one grant away from one clinical trial, away from one breakthrough that opens the doors and to finally curing and making these livable diseases rather than a certain life sentence or death sentence.
And it was really during that time that you and Brian Cutler together contacted us and said, hey, we want to invest in research as well. And you learned about that from looking at other states, because that's something you can do in politics. You can actually learn from other people and you can get ideas from them. And what made you think, hey, we could do something here in Pennsylvania to improve not just ALS, but brain disease research?
Well, Tony, I've got you to credit because you were the one who raised to me the amazing work that they were doing out in Minnesota. The state senator out there who was loved by everyone, in their Capitol building was diagnosed with ALS, and they just a few short years ago to honor him made a $25 million appropriation, 20 of that, I believe, going to research. And I did a quick look around, and I was pretty experienced with what was contained in our state budget, and more importantly, what wasn't. And I learned that we as a state were not directly funding neurodegenerative research. These research institutions were relying primarily on very limited and competitive grants at the federal level. So I thought, we've got in Pennsylvania some of the best world-class research institutions and programs and clinicians doing the work. We've got to be funding. We've got to be helping these research labs that are really surviving on shoestring budgets. So, and that was long before the uncertainty of federal funding and the cuts that were threatened in the current administration. So I had met Governor Josh Shapiro when he was a candidate, and he had learned of my father's diagnosis, and my father died a couple weeks before he was elected, and not more than a month into his office holding, he had me in the governor's office to talk about the research funding that I was hoping to work on.
And I think that really shows that it's not just about dollars, which are important. It's not just about projects, but they're important. It's about people, like the relationships that you have, the way you carry yourself. Not just Kyle Mullins, but anybody. That if people are going to remember human beings more than they're going to remember ideas. And from meeting so many people, I've met Governor Shapiro a couple times. I feel like he probably remembers like how many buttons are on my shirt because he doesn't forget things. So, it sets an imprint into his head. And he also has a long history of knowing us and knowing ALS through his support of his friend, Wes Rose, who passed away from ALS in 2018. And just goes to show again, these long-term relationships leave an impact on everybody.
Exactly. I always quote Mr. Rogers. I guess he was my first therapist in life, without even knowing it. The connections we make in this life, maybe that's what heaven is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that all the time whenever I talk to young people, when I'm visiting a school or having a chance to host an advocacy group or a Boy Scout group, I talk about how important relationships are, never burning bridges, always treating people as fellow humans first, because you never know how you will need to work with them or depend on them years later in times good and bad. Representative Brian Cutler was the House Majority Leader in the Pennsylvania House when I was first sworn in. And during his welcome remarks to our incoming class of 2019, all the new state reps, he shared his story, and he talked about how important it is to learn one another's stories in the House and throughout the course of your life, because everybody has a story, and that story matters. And he shared his story about his path to the House and his tragic loss of not just one but both of his parents to ALS. And this was long before ALS had visited my life. And I remember not being able to fathom the depth of that loss. And he was another source of support for me much like Eileen Miller was. It's like I keep calling it a club, the club that nobody has to be in, but you thank God that there is a club.
Mhm. And again, that club is filled with people. And I say that because you have met the people that work here at ALS United Mid Atlantic. We've come for advocacy or nurses and social workers, as well as the patients and caregivers and spouses. And I know that you have met, for example, our social worker, Mary Beth, in Scranton. She was so happy to finally meet you in person when she did, and seen you a few times. And Larissa got to see you at one of our events and talked about reaching out to your office. As someone who is driving funding, driving policy, how important is it for you and others to know that when you're supporting something like our work and our programs, that there are human beings behind it who are committed, and it's not just like an AI program, nothing against AI necessarily, but it's not just a spreadsheet, but there's human beings who you see are dedicated to this that are implementing that mission.
Sure, I think too often when it comes to advocacy in general, there's this misconception that we're raising awareness of a problem, but is there anything happening beyond that? Like what are we doing once we're aware of something? We have all these awareness days that we recognize and celebrate or lift up. But I will say there are amazing advocacy organizations, and ALS United Mid Atlantic has been there for me. I've had again the fact that yes, it was a tragedy and heartbreak and devastation that brought ALS so close to my life, but the ALS United was such a supportive organization for my parents, for our family, and for countless others who are going through the very same thing. I I think the work that has the progress that we've made as far as funding research, but also helping to care helping to care for people with ALS. None of that could have been accomplished. None of these strides that we've made at the state level or at the federal level in Congress would have been possible without the people you mentioned that make up the ALS. And it's, we could propose all of the meaningful, meritorious bills and budgetary ideas, but if we don't have testimonials from the people whose lives are affected, usually those ideas end up on the cutting room floor, and that was never acceptable to you and to those at the ALS United. I'm very thankful to have all of you in my life.
Well, we'll have more ALS United Mid Atlantic advocates attending advocacy days, whether it's in Harrisburg or Washington, D.C., or Trenton or Dover and other places around the country. A lot of them, it's their first time going when they participate in advocacy. What would you say is an important tip for those who maybe it's their first time attending advocacy? Maybe they're a little bit intimidated about it.
Yep. And when I look in the mirror, I'm just Kyle. I'm a dad. I pick up after my dog in the morning. Like whoever's office you're going into, regardless of what their title is, remind yourself, especially if you've got the jitters, that they're just people also. They just happen to work in an elected role or an elected office and have a title. But at the end of the day, they're just people too, and they've got hopes and fears and worries and bills and all of the things, all of the human experiences of of our lives. So my first bit of advice is to help to help ease the jitters or uncertainty. Remember that first, and then once you do that, it's you'll understand and be able to connect with them at a human level, because maybe that lawmaker, whether it be in Congress or at the state level, maybe they don't know anybody living or having passed from ALS, but it it also helps to educate those legislators that it is in the same family of neurodegenerative diseases of as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and Huntington's, which when you start expanding that circle, you definitely will. You'll definitely have some understanding of what from someone maybe who lost someone to dementia related or Alzheimer's or dementia related disorder. So I think it's important to go in there and educate, and also be. You already did the brave thing by staring ALS and its diagnosis in the face and saying, I'm going to go to the Capitol building and advocate anyway, even though I'm tired, even though we've got to, load up the accessible van and haul all of the equipment to Washington or to Harrisburg. You've already done the brave thing by being vulnerable and sharing something deeply personal with hopefully change makers. So once you're in there, just realize you're talking to another person who, without question, will find that level of a level of compassion that might just be enough to get the votes to get important stuff done.
Yep. I have seen that over and over again. People are people. It might be hard to remember that, but you'll see somebody who is in, whether it's in public office or they're a CEO or they're a professional athlete, and they're really good at what they do, but they just want to get home and watch Abbott Elementary or baseball, or they're just a regular person, and connecting in that way is important. Before we finish here, like you said, we were able to get that research funding approved in the last budget. We're hoping to continue that. The governor supported in his budget proposal. And so we're looking, not just this year, but let's 5 years down the line. At our Help on Hope event this year on April 9th, you'll be there. Brian Cutler's planned to be there. And we're having others as well. We will be including people who represent Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, FTD with dementia, and ALS together. What do you see as the hope and opportunity in this collaboration that you have helped to bridge for ALS United Mid-Atlantic and for these other disease missions to unite towards new research in general?
So, broadly speaking, our efforts in support of these populations, of these people, is twofold. There's support, because we want to make sure that organizations like ALS Mid-Atlantic have the necessary funding to provide the support to families, care services funding. So that's one track. The other parallel track is the Hope track, is the research funding, and those both must work on parallel tracks and hand in hand, because there's an absolute tangible benefit to providing hope ahead of cures and treatments. Yes, we're excited that the governor continues to propose it as an annual line item in the budget. once you get your foot in the door, as far as a line item, that's a huge victory. And then it's on us to defend that line item, make sure it stays at that amount, and eventually increases. And the same goes for all these other advocacy organizations related to the various diseases you mentioned. So I'm looking forward to that event in April. And I was really struck at a recent visit to the University of Pittsburgh. I was invited. The governor and I were invited just a little bit before Christmas, and we got to tour their research lab, where I finally got to meet those strangers working in closet-sized research labs with microscopes and computers, trying to improve lives and outcomes. And in one lab, it was they were studying ALS, and in the very next room, it was someone looking at concerning proteins associated with dementia and Alzheimer's. So, those were just we're not talking cities away or blocks away. These were rooms right next to one another, just to demonstrate, and it was really impactful for me to see just exactly how complementary research funding is across these diseases.
And it's personally really gratifying to me knowing that you had talked with some of those people there. Dr. Lacomas was at UPMC. He was the doctor that took care of my grandfather, and I never met him until I started working with you on research issues. And it was because my dad took him to the clinic visits. I had heard about him and his compassion and his way of dealing with patients on a human level, and they had a great experience with Dr. Lacomas in Pittsburgh. And I've said before, I didn't have someone like Ellen Phillips here or the Philadelphia Phillies on our back. We didn't know what to do, but that's a really neat thing that I got to do here, is connect with them that I wouldn't have been able to do anyway. So if you're listening, again, you can find out about our events at alsmidatlantic.org and our Help and Hope Symposium, which is on April 9th. You can go to helpandhopealsmidatlantic.org so you can get information there, or if you are living with ALS in our area, reach out to your social worker or nurse to find out more about not just these events, but your questions, topics you'd like to see in this podcast, and how to be an advocate. Kyle, we really appreciate all that you continue to do for us, and we look forward to working with you as we can advance our needs for ALS patients, caregivers, and families.
It's my pleasure, Tony, and thank you to everyone who's listening and for your advocacy. You've got a friend and an advocate in me.
So much.